Hi Lee.
Hi.
Can you please start by just introducing yourself and telling us what you do at Nelson Tasman Hospice?
Yep, so my name's Lea Galvin and I am the Clinical Services Manager and also a Clinical Psychologist at the hospice.
Great. And can you just tell me a little bit about your professional journey to get to Nelson Tasman Hospice?
Where to start? So I did all of my training at Otago Uni, Scarfy Land, and I trained in clinical psychology and did my PhD in clinical psychology there, and worked a little bit in neurological rehab following graduation, and then I went overseas, worked in a community mental health teams, and then came back and decided I was moving to Nelson. So I moved to Nelson, and I had about 10 years working at older person's mental health. And in that time, I also ran my own private practice, and out of that, I ended up doing a lot of court work, so forensic work, and I started learning a lot about trauma through that, and I, as a result, ended up doing a little bit of work for the hospice as a contractor, just around patients and whānau that had complex needs. And I did that for about 5 years and worked quite closely with Medical Director Jodie. And then I knew I wanted to work at the hospice. It was just a matter of biding my time and waiting to see as an opportunity came up, and the Clinical Services Manager role came up, and I thought this meets all my particular interests and passions, and the hospice I thought had a gap at that time with very complex mental health needs, so I applied and here I am a year later.
A year later.
I know.
What a wealth of knowledge for the hospice to have as part of its services. So in terms of being a clinical psychologist
Yep.
and also our manager of clinical services, can you just explain what you and the team actually do?
Yep. So two hats, two roles. So as the Clinical Services Manager, I help support and lead the nursing teams. So that's our inpatient teams and our community teams. I also help to lead the allied health teams. So those professionals include physiotherapists, social workers, psychotherapists, spiritual and pastoral coordination, bereavement care. So quite a range, really, and that's part of my role, is leading those teams, and another big part of it is the governance of the organisation itself. So work with the leadership team, looking at how we increase the sustainability and equity of our services as our really key objectives at this point in time. So that's that role. That makes that role sound very doable, but there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the key things. And the other aspect of my work is as a clinical psychologist. So clinical psychologists are trained really to work, oftentimes we'll work in hospitals, in acute mental health units, forensic units. So the training takes about 10 years, and you need to do your PhD or Masters in psychology at the same time. That means a very large student loan. So I'm very used to working in sort of medical systems, and I work alongside the allied health teams, the nursing teams, the medical teams, the volunteer teams, to provide specialist palliative care for patients. And specialist palliative care isn't what people traditionally think of hospice. Certainly walking alongside people, cups of tea and conversations are a crucial part, but actually we're a specialised medical facility, and we work as an interdisciplinary team. And what that means, it's probably the best way to tell you, is if you think about a symptom, so say someone comes and says, I'm experiencing pain. Now that's not universal with people with life-limiting illness, but it is something that people can experience. As a team, we would address the patient's need to reduce their pain in multiple different ways. So as a psychologist, I might go in and look at how a person's learnt about pain over their life. What beliefs are they putting over the top of their pain? Are they being hypervigilant to the symptoms? Are they really worrying about it? Is there underlying mental health stuff that is making it worse, like depression? The physiotherapist might look at movement and exercises to increase mobility so that someone doesn't become immobile. Social workers might look at the impact that pain has on family relationships. If you're a mum and you're in pain, you can't necessarily look after your little kids as well. So social worker might look at some of those aspects. So and the nursing and the doctors would treat it more from a pharmacological point of view. So we all hit the same thing, just from slightly different angles, which produces, we hope, the optimum care for people.
Yes, I mean, that's something, having been, new to the service, is that wrap round and integration of the teams. That for the Nelson Tasman community, in terms of people with life-limiting illnesses and their whānau and their families, that's quite extraordinary.
Absolutely. Like I've worked in health systems throughout New Zealand and overseas, and I'm astounded on a daily basis how good this team is, and how much the patient and their whānau is the centre of absolutely every decision that is made. But that's not easy. It has been a really rough ride for everyone in healthcare throughout New Zealand in the last few years, and the hospice is no different. We've faced teams exhaustion. We continue to face funding issues that are ongoing, and just the very real nature of COVID. How do we keep COVID out of our inpatient facility? How do we protect our patients? How do we protect our team? Yeah.
And it's interesting because, again, being new to the service, is the inpatient facility at Suffolk Road is obviously a crucial part to what we do, but it's such a small part of who we, what we do and how we work with the community. I mean, I was reading something about last year's statistics, and it said that of the 222 people, I think, that had a stay in the inpatient unit, 172 of those were about managing complex symptoms. And so a lot of what we're doing is in the community, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that beautiful building is such a trademark of hospice here in the region, but it is the tip of an iceberg. So what's not seen is that most of our work is where individuals and their whānau are. That can be at the beach, can be at the pub. I've had conversations with patients at the pub. It's not about what's easiest for us, it's about what's easiest for the patient. And so our community services are the biggest part of what we do, because our ethos is that we promote an individual to live while they have a life-limiting condition. So it's not about having someone come into hospice, go into the hospital and die. That's a tiny part of what we might do for a small minority of people.
And I think also the thing that is really important for community to understand is, yes, it's absolutely about that patient, but it's also about their family and their whānau, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And supporting them through what is, an incredibly difficult time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be hard to think of anything that is more traumatic and psychologically distressing for a family and for the person they love than to face life-limiting illness and to face someone they love's death. So our care doesn't stop the day someone in our service dies. We have follow-up with bereavement services, so that's the team of our bereavement coordinator, our spiritual and pastoral coordinator, myself, our psychotherapist, and the nurses who oftentimes are walking alongside a family in their home the most. They're the person that the family might see the most. We all follow up. and we have services, remembrance days, where we mark the passing of people that we've grown to really, really care about too. And that's the thing, this isn't just a job. You don't do this because you want to go to work each day. You do it because you really, really are passionate, one, about the patients and their whānau, but also about palliative care, specialist palliative care, and how that can help people to live while they still can. Yeah.
And if there was one kind of myth that you'd like to dispel, one, you can have more than one, Lee.
Yeah, I was going to say, I might have more than one.
Yeah, but what would that be? A myth that people might have about what specialist palliative care is in our community. What would that be?
So I've got two, because I can't ever keep things to one. The first is that we are a building where people go to die. That is the most pervasive myth, I think, that needs to be dispelled. We're a really highly experienced specialist team of professionals who wrap around wherever a patient and their whānau are, and only a tiny proportion of that is in our inpatient unit. So that would be the first, and the second is that hospice is always going to be there, because unfortunately, with the gap between what we are funded and what we need to provide, because we are more specialist now, that means we have more complex families and individuals, we are going to have to work really hard to try and bridge that gap between what we're funded for and what it actually costs. And so that's a key part of what we're doing, our leadership team, with the rest of our team, to figure out how we make sure we're still here in 5 years, 10 years, and how we're better. Yeah.
And, certainly in terms of, this being an industry or an essential service, the demand is going to only grow, and the complexity of how we need to respond to people and their whānau, that's going to become even more complex, isn't it?
We have an ageing population and people are living longer with life-limiting illnesses, which is fantastic. But that does mean that we are going to have to work a lot harder to resource the need that is there in the community. For example, we have myself probably a few hours a week and a 0.6, which is not even full-time, one psychotherapist for the region.
Extraordinary.
And that isn't sustainable.
Why do you do what you do, Lee?
Oh, God, there's so many reasons. I initially started doing it for the legacy of 4 very good friends who died under hospice care, and the profound difference hospice care made to them, to me, as someone who loved them. That was my driving force to start with, and that's still there. There isn't a day go by that I don't think of one of them, at least. But now I do it because I see the role clinical psychology can make, the difference that it can make, and I see the role for specialist palliative care moving forward and how exciting that is to think about what we can do from here to support the community. The thing I never talk about, but I think this is potentially it's a podcast in itself, is the role of trauma in life-limiting conditions. And so
we absolutely started.
I was like, yeah. And I think that in itself is something that we didn't touch on much, and I don't want to overshadow the general nature of this, but it might be something that we can look at
absolutely
in the future, because there's so much there.
Well, I mean, depending on how this goes, one of, the ideas is how can we do our training and, support the training that we do with our volunteer and patient, our volunteers that work with our patients and the community. How can we do some of that via podcast, and
also just for the patients themselves, like 100%. Patients and family to have a podcast that can explain why the symptoms you're experiencing are happening psychologically, physically, whatever it might be, and how that all relates to how your brain is trying to adapt to this thing that is the massive threat, and what you can do about it. So to have a podcast that people can look at in their own time when they're not feeling great and review it as much as they want to, that to me is some of the most exciting things moving forward, so that it's not always about resourcing more people, it's about doing it differently so more people can have our resources.
How we use our technology. So considering the role that you've got as the clinical psychologist, and you've talked a little bit about that, tell us a little bit about where you think you can really add value in the service and working with the patient and also their whānau.
And it's partly as a clinical psychologist, but also just as a clinical services manager, thinking about what our teams, how we can do this differently. And using technology is going to be probably one of our biggest leaps forward, I think, moving into the future. I've talked about the funding issues and how we can't just keep coming back to our community with our hand out. So we need to think about doing things differently. And one of the ways to do that, I think, and I know a lot of the team I work with feel the same way, is looking at how do we use podcasts? How do we use online resources better for people to be able to, in their own time, look up something, and it might be, say, on trauma. What is it? Why am I feeling this way? What can I do to help myself feel less scared or less overwhelmed? And what can I help other professionals who are supporting me to understand about what I need? And that can be done, when you're sitting in a chair with the cat on your knee at home on your tablet. You don't have to come into an office, or you don't have to have a professional come out to you. It's about empowering people in their own space where they feel more comfortable. And I think that's going to be a huge area. And that's an area that I get particularly excited about and could go on about all day, so I won't. Yeah.
No, I think absolutely enabling technology to deliver the service, as you've said, as the demand and the need grows, but also to provide more service, more, like you've said, bite-sized information at your place, at your time of need, when you're ready for it, and to be able to share that, like you said, with loved ones as well as the people that are caring for you.
And we know we've got inequities in our care. We're working really hard to try and reduce those. But we know Māori Pacifica, we know communities with disabilities. We know there is a lot of communities out there and rural communities that we're not reaching adequately yet.
Yeah, I love the concept of meeting people before you have to go into that world,
absolutely.
Because it reduces that, to some extent, obviously, reduces that anxiety and trauma because they've already had a connection. I love that.
One of the key things about trauma-centred care is that relationship. It actually helps soothe a brain that's over-aroused. If someone's seen my face, someone's heard me talk, someone's heard some of the ideas I might talk with them about, because they clicked on a link on the website, then they come in to see me or I come out to see them, and the relationship's already started. So that's the crucial thing.
So exciting.
Yeah, I know it is.